Norway is home to some of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth. But most people never learn what actually shaped them. If you skip this first part, you'll miss the details that make every fjord, every mountain, and every coastline so much more meaningful. So before we explore Norway's most incredible places, we'll start with the fascinating facts that help you understand the land you're about to see. And trust me, the next part will make everything you see later even more unforgettable. Norway stretches more than 1,700 kilometers, over 1,050 miles, from its southern tip to the edge of the Arctic. It's one of the longest countries in the world, yet only about 5.5 million people live here. That's fewer people than many single European cities. And there's a reason for that, a reason most travelers never hear about. Because Norway isn't just long, it's carved, shaped, transformed, not by people, but by forces so enormous they once covered the entire land with ice thicker than the world's tallest skyscrapers. For almost 2.5 million years, massive glaciers carved through Norway again and again. Some of these ice sheets were over 3 kilometers, nearly 2 miles thick, pressing down with unimaginable weight. And here's the part most visitors don't realize. Every valley, every deep blue fjord, every sheer cliff you'll see later in this documentary, they all began as scars cut by ice. But something even more surprising is still happening today. Norway is rising, literally. When the ice melted, the land underneath started lifting upward like a sponge, slowly regaining its shape. In some areas, the ground still rises almost 1 centimeter, about half an inch, per year. It doesn't sound like much, but over centuries, it reshapes coastlines, changes river paths, and quietly alters the landscapes people live in. Yet the glaciers explain only half the story. To understand the other half, you have to go deeper to the ancient bedrock beneath Norway's surface. More than 1 billion years ago, entire continents collided here. Mountains higher than the Himalayas once stood on this land. Over time, wind, water, and ice wore them down. But their ancient roots are still visible today. Some of the rocks in Norway are among the oldest on Earth, up to 2.7 billion years old, almost 2/3 the age of the planet itself. So how can a landscape built on such old stone feel so sharp and fresh? The answer lies in the combination of ancient foundations and relatively young shapes. The rock is ancient, the carving is recent. Norway's coastline adds another strange chapter to its story. If you traced every bay, island, inlet, and curve, the coastline would stretch more than 100,000 kilometers, over 62,000 miles. That makes it one of the longest coastlines in the world, longer than the coasts of Australia, India, and Brazil combined. And yet, Norway itself is small on the map. The secret is the shape of drowned valleys. When the last ice age ended and sea levels rose, water flooded the deep channels carved by ice. The result was a broken-looking coast full of narrow inlets, sheltered waterways, and countless islands. The landscape we now call fjord country. But perhaps the biggest surprise lies in the climate. Even though Norway reaches nearly 71 degrees north, farther than Alaska or most of Siberia, its western coast remains surprisingly mild. Warm water from the Caribbean travels here through the Norwegian current, keeping the coastline ice-free even in winter. Because of this, you can stand in a green coastal valley while looking directly at snow-covered mountains only a short distance away. Not many places on Earth offer contrast this strong, but this balance is changing. Norway has warmed faster than many regions on the planet. In some areas, average temperatures have risen by more than 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, in just a few decades. This warming is causing glaciers to retreat, permafrost to thaw, and weather patterns to shift. The same forces that once shaped Norway for thousands of years are now changing faster than ever before. Yet people have lived here for millennia, adapting to cold, darkness, storms, and enormous distances. Traditional Norwegian architecture is a reflection of survival. Wooden stave churches that could withstand harsh winters, mountain farms built with turf roofs for insulation, coastal houses designed for storms sweeping in from the sea. Even the language adapted. Norwegians developed dozens of words describing snow, ice, and winter conditions. Not just snow, but heavy snow, drifting snow, thin ice, dangerous ice, melting snow, snow that hides ice, and snow that arrives too early or too late. These descriptions weren't cultural decoration. They were essential for survival in an unpredictable climate. Nature guided life. But it also created a landscape that feels almost unreal. Sharp ridges, deep valleys, serene coastlines, and Arctic wilderness all exist inside one narrow slice of the planet. And the shapes you'll see later in this documentary, the cliffs, the valleys, the fjords, were carved only about 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. On the scale of Earth's history, that was yesterday. This combination of ancient rock and young landscapes is what gives Norway its distinct character, a place where the Earth's oldest foundations meet some of its newest creations. And now that you understand the forces behind the scenery, the places we're about to visit will look even more extraordinary. If there's one place that shows how dramatic Norway can be from the very first glance, it's the Lofoten Islands, a chain of sharp granite peaks rising straight out of the Norwegian Sea. What makes Lofoten so striking isn't just the mountains themselves, but how suddenly they appear. These islands sit far above the Arctic Circle at nearly 68 degrees north, yet the surrounding water stays surprisingly mild thanks to the warm current pushing in from the Atlantic. It creates a landscape that shouldn't exist. Icy summits towering above turquoise bays that stay ice-free even in winter. Lofoten's mountains are the remains of ancient peaks formed almost 3 billion years ago, reshaped by glaciers into the jagged silhouettes we see today. Many rise more than 800 meters, around 2,600 feet straight from sea level, creating one of the steepest coastal mountain walls in the world. Because the land drops so quickly, the fjords here become incredibly deep, in some places plunging hundreds of meters while still close to shore. But Lofoten holds another surprise. The villages scattered across these islands were once among Europe's most important cod fishing centers, and for more than 1,000 years, winter migrations of Arctic cod shaped the entire region's culture and economy. And as you travel onward, the scenery doesn't soften. It becomes even wilder, revealing a coastline where Norway's Arctic character shows its true strength. If Lofoten feels dramatic, Senja feels untamed. Norway's second-largest island rises from the ocean in a maze of peaks, cliffs, and deep blue fjords. But what sets Senja apart is how quickly the landscape shifts as you move across it. The western coast is battered by the Norwegian Sea, carved into razor-sharp ridges and vertical rock faces that plunge straight into the water. Some of these mountains rise more than 1,000 meters, over 3,200 feet, almost instantly from sea level, creating one of the steepest coastlines anywhere in the Arctic. Senja's shape is the result of relentless glacial erosion. During the last ice age, ice streams here were unusually powerful, carving narrow corridors through the rock and leaving behind a pattern of steep walls and tight valleys. Because of that, the fjords on Senja are narrower and more dramatic than many on the mainland. But Senja also hides something unexpected. Its eastern side is calm, sheltered, and dotted with small fishing villages where life still follows the rhythm of the sea. This contrast, wild and serene, makes the island feel like two completely different worlds. And as you continue farther north, the landscapes begin to shift again, revealing a region shaped as much by the sky above as the land beneath. Tromsø is often called the gateway to the Arctic, but its location is even more surprising than the nickname suggests. The city sits at nearly 69 degrees north, farther than most of Alaska, yet it remains far milder than its latitude should allow. That's because warm water from the Atlantic reaches deep into northern Norway, creating a climate that supports forests, vibrant coastal life, and a city that thrives in conditions that would be extreme elsewhere. But Tromsø's most fascinating feature is not its weather, it's the sky. This region lies directly beneath the auroral oval, the zone where charged particles from the sun collide with Earth's magnetic field. This makes Tromsø one of the best places on the planet to experience the northern lights. During winter, when the sun doesn't rise for weeks, the night becomes a canvas for green, violet, and pink curtains of light that move across the sky. Tromsø also played a major role in polar exploration. Many expeditions heading toward the North Pole began here. Using the city as a final stop for supplies and repairs before crossing into extreme Arctic conditions. And as the road continues north, The landscape stretched toward a place where mainland Europe finally comes to an end, and the ocean takes over. Reaching Nordkapp feels like arriving at the edge of the world. This cliff rises 307 meters, just over 1,000 feet, straight above the Arctic Ocean, marking one of the northernmost accessible points in Europe. Standing here, you're closer to the North Pole than you are to most European capitals. What makes this place extraordinary isn't only its position, but its environment. Nordkapp's geology is equally striking. The plateau is built from ancient slate layers tilted upward by tectonic movement hundreds of millions of years ago. Over time, waves, ice, and wind carved the cliff into the massive wall we see today. Beneath the surface, the ocean floor drops quickly, reaching depths of hundreds of meters close to shore, a sign of the powerful glacial forces that once passed through this region. And from here, the journey takes a dramatic turn, because just beyond the mainland lies a wilderness so remote and so isolated that few places on Earth compare. Svalbard is one of the northernmost inhabited places on Earth, a remote Arctic archipelago located between mainland Norway and the North Pole. What makes Svalbard so extraordinary is the scale of its wilderness. Nearly 60% of the islands are covered by glaciers, some reaching 600 meters, almost 2,000 feet, thick, flowing slowly toward the sea where they calve into blue icebergs. Because of its latitude, at 78 degrees north, Svalbard experiences extreme light cycles. Months of continuous daylight, followed by months of polar night. During winter, the sun doesn't rise at all, creating conditions where the only natural light comes from moonlit snow and the aurora borealis. In summer, the midnight sun reveals an environment full of life. Arctic foxes, reindeer, millions of seabirds, and polar bears, which outnumber people in some regions. Svalbard also sits on permafrost, meaning the ground remains frozen year-round. Buildings here can't be placed directly on the soil. They stand on stilts to prevent heat from melting the ground beneath them. And yet, despite its isolation, Svalbard has something unexpected. A research community where scientists study climate, glaciers, and the rapid changes happening in the Arctic. As you leave these remote islands behind, the journey returns to mainland Norway, and the scenery begins to shift once again, this time toward one of the country's most distinctive architectural landscapes. Ålesund may look like a typical Norwegian coastal town from a distance, but up close, it reveals one of Norway's most unusual stories. In 1904, a massive fire destroyed almost the entire city. More than 850 buildings burned down in a single night. What happened next changed the town forever. Instead of rebuilding in the older wooden style, Ålesund was reconstructed almost entirely in Art Nouveau architecture, rare not just for Norway, but for all of Scandinavia. The new buildings featured curved facades, towers, decorative stonework, and detailed ornaments inspired by natural shapes. Because everything was rebuilt at once, Ålesund became one of the world's most coherent examples of this style. The result is a coastal city that feels unexpectedly elegant against the backdrop of rugged fjords. But the location is just as interesting as the architecture. Ålesund sits on several interconnected islands, surrounded by narrow waterways and steep hills. From the viewpoint on Mount Axla, you can see how the city stretches like a ribbon across the landscape, a strategic position that shaped its history as a major fishing and trading port. And heading inland from here, the terrain tightens, the valleys deepen, and the scenery moves toward one of Norway's most iconic natural masterpieces. Geirangerfjord is often described as the most beautiful fjord in Norway, and there are clear reasons why. This UNESCO World Heritage Site was carved by glaciers that once filled the valley with ice hundreds of meters thick. When they melted, the ocean flooded the valley, leaving behind a fjord more than 260 meters, 850 feet deep, surrounded by cliffs that rise sharply toward the sky. One of the fjord's most fascinating features is its collection of hanging waterfalls. The most famous, the Seven Sisters, falls in 7 parallel streams from a height of 250 meters, over 820 feet. These waterfalls flow directly off the mountain edges because the glaciers carved the valley so deeply that side rivers now plunge straight down instead of descending gradually. Geirangerfjord's farms add another layer to its story. For centuries, families lived on tiny ledges high above the water, where they built farms in places so steep they had to tie ropes around children to prevent falls. Many of these farms are abandoned today, but they remain as reminders of how people adapted to extreme terrain. And as the fjord narrows and the mountains rise higher, the route forward leads into another region shaped by dramatic glacial forces, a landscape where the contours become even tighter and the valleys more untouched. Nærøyfjord is one of the narrowest fjords in all of Norway. At its slimmest point, it measures only 250 meters, barely 820 feet across. What makes it so remarkable is how steep the surroundings are. The mountains rise nearly 1,700 meters, over 5,500 feet straight up from the water, forming a corridor that feels almost impossibly tight. This dramatic topography is why Nærøyfjord is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It represents one of the most extreme examples of glacial carving on the planet. During the last ice age, the glacier that shaped this fjord was confined by exceptionally hard rock. With no room to widen, it carved downward instead, creating a trench-like valley that now forms the fjord's deep, narrow channel. Even today, the waters beneath the surface sink more than 500 meters, around 1,640 feet. And as the valley widens again, and the landscape softens, the route forward leads toward one of Norway's most surprising engineering achievements, hidden deep within a mountain landscape shaped by the same forces. The Flåm Railway is often called one of the world's most scenic train routes, but its true story lies in how improbable its construction was. The line climbs from sea level in the village of Flåm up to the mountain station at Myrdal, reaching an elevation difference of 866 meters, nearly 2,840 feet over just 20 kilometers, about 12 miles. That makes it one of the steepest standard gauge railways on Earth. To make this climb possible, engineers had to carve 20 tunnels, many of them by hand. Construction began in the 1920s and took 2 decades, involving thousands of workers who faced hazardous conditions in extreme winter weather. Today, the railway passes waterfalls, cliffs, deep valleys, and tiny farms perched on slopes where agriculture has survived for centuries. And as the tracks reach the mountain plateau, the scenery shifts again, heading toward a place where Norway's raw natural power becomes impossible to ignore. Vøringsfossen is one of Norway's most dramatic waterfalls, a powerful cascade dropping 182 meters, nearly 600 feet into the narrow Mobitelen Valley. What makes it especially remarkable is the setting, a steep, U-shaped valley carved by glaciers, with the river plunging over a lip of hard rock that resisted erosion during the last ice age. For years, Vøringsfossen was difficult to reach. Travelers had to climb a winding path built in the 19th century, known as the Mobo Road. It featured 1,500 stone steps and was the only route between eastern and western Norway until the early 1900s. Only later did the modern road and viewpoint platforms make the waterfall accessible to a wider audience. The waterfall's power comes from the Hardangervidda Plateau, the largest mountain plateau in Europe. Snow and ice stored over the winter melt during spring and summer, feeding the river and creating the strong flow that makes Vøringsfossen so impressive. The new pedestrian bridge suspended above the canyon offers a close-up view of the falls while revealing the deep valley carved beneath. And from here, the landscape transforms once more, leading into a region where mountains take center stage, rising sharply towards some of Norway's most dramatic high-altitude terrain. Trolltunga is one of Norway's most recognizable rock formations, a horizontal slab of stone jutting 700 meters, about 2,300 feet above the Lake Ringedalsvatnet. What makes Trolltunga so fascinating is how it was formed. During the last ice age, glaciers filled this entire valley, grinding away softer rock while leaving behind a harder horizontal layer. As the ice retreated, water infiltrated cracks in the rock, froze, and expanded. This freeze-thaw cycle eventually pried the slab outward, creating the dramatic tongue shape we see today. The area around Trolltunga is part of a vast mountain plateau, shaped by erosion that occurred over millions of years. Below the cliff lies a deep glacial valley carved by ice more than 1,000 meters, over 3,280 feet thick. The lake beneath it acts as a reservoir, fed by snowmelt that accumulates across the plateau. Reaching Trolltunga requires a demanding hike, often taking 8 to 12 hours, depending on conditions. Despite the difficulty, thousands attempt the route every summer, drawn by the chance to stand on one of Norway's most dramatic viewpoints. And as you continue farther south, the landscape remains just as vertical, leading to another cliff where nature created a viewpoint unlike anything else in Norway. Preikestolen is a near-perfect geological platform, a massive square cliff that rises 604 meters, roughly 1,980 feet above the waters of Nærøyfjord. Its clean, vertical walls look almost man-made, but the formation is entirely natural. During the last ice age, giant blocks of ice pressed against the mountain, widening cracks through repeated freezing and thawing. Over thousands of years, these cracks deepened until they created the flat, angular shape seen today. The surface of Preikestolen is surprisingly smooth, measuring about 25 by 25 meters, roughly 82 by 82 feet. Geologists believe the plateau was once covered in ice that polished its top before the glacier retreated. The fjord below is equally impressive. A deep trench carved by ice streams that cut through the valley and left sheer walls rising from the water. And the next stop takes the vertical drama even further, to a boulder suspended in a mountain gap, balanced above one of the deepest fjords in southern Norway. Kjeragbolten is one of Norway's most unusual landmarks, a 5 cubic meter boulder wedged between two vertical rock walls, hanging 984 meters, about 3,225 feet above Nærøyfjord. What makes this formation so intriguing is how it ended up in such an unlikely position. During the final stages of the last ice age, meltwater carried rocks down the mountainsides. As the glaciers retreated, one of these rocks became lodged in a narrow crevice, held tightly in place by the surrounding granite. The surrounding Kjerag Plateau rises more than 1,100 meters, around 3,600 feet above sea level, shaped by repeated cycles of glaciation. The rock walls here are some of the steepest in the region, making the fjord below appear almost vertical from the summit. And as the route continues downward toward the coast, human settlement becomes more visible again, leading into one of Norway's key cities, shaped by centuries of maritime history. Stavanger is one of Norway's most historic port cities, shaped by centuries of fishing, shipping, and maritime trade. What makes Stavanger especially interesting is how quickly it transformed during the 20th century. In the late 1960s, Norway discovered offshore oil in the North Sea, and Stavanger became the center of the industry. Today, it's home to the Norwegian Petroleum Museum, where visitors can see how offshore platforms operate and how drilling technology evolved in extreme ocean conditions. But Stavanger's history goes much deeper. Its old town, Gamle Stavanger, contains one of Europe's best preserved collections of wooden houses from the 18th and 19th centuries. Over 170 white timber homes, all carefully protected. These buildings survived an era when many Norwegian coastal towns rebuilt in stone after devastating fires. Their survival creates a rare window into traditional Norwegian architecture. Stavanger is also known for its strong cultural scene. Every year, street artists from around the world come here to create large-scale murals, turning parts of the city into an open-air gallery. And as you move farther north along the coast, the urban landscape begins to fade again, giving way to a region where the mountains return and history and nature combine in one of Norway's most atmospheric cities. Bergen is often described as Norway's cultural capital, and for good reason. The city has been a major trading hub for more than 900 years. Its most iconic district, Bergen, consists of colorful wooden buildings that date back to the Hanseatic League, a medieval trading network that dominated commerce across northern Europe. These warehouses, leaning slightly from age, were once filled with stockfish, grain, and goods arriving from foreign ports. Today, they are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Bergen is also one of the rainiest cities in Europe, receiving over 2,500 millimeters, almost 100 inches of rainfall each year. This moisture supports lush vegetation that grows even on steep slopes around the city. The surrounding mountains rise quickly from the coast, creating a natural amphitheater that shapes Bergen's climate and scenery. The city's location made it a gateway between Norway's coastal communities and the Norwegian Sea. For centuries, ships passed through Bergen on their way to the Arctic, transporting goods, equipment, and explorers. And as the journey continues inland, the coastline gradually gives way to forested hills, lakes, and valleys, leading toward a region where Norway's political history and modern culture come together. Oslo, Norway's capital, sits at the head of a deep inlet known as the Oslofjord. What makes Oslo unique is how tightly it integrates nature into its urban design. More than two-thirds of the city's area is covered by forests, parks, lakes, and protected nature reserves. This layout reflects a long Norwegian tradition, building cities that remain close to the landscape. Historically, Oslo developed as a trading and shipping center. Its medieval fortress, Akershus, guarded the entrance to the city for more than 700 years. Today, the waterfront tells a very different story. Modern architecture like the Oslo Opera House and the Munch Museum rises directly from the shoreline, symbolizing the city's shift toward culture, design, and technology. Oslo is also home to the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, which takes place annually at the City Hall. This tradition began in 1901 and continues to attract global attention. But what truly defines Oslo is its immediate access to nature. Within minutes, you can reach dense forests, ski routes, and lakes shaped by the last ice age. And as you move north and upward, the urban landscape fades, replaced by mountains that reveal a completely different side of Norway, one shaped by elevation, climate, and ancient geological forces. Jotunheimen is known as the home of the giants, and the name isn't an exaggeration. This national park contains Norway's highest mountains, including Galdhøpiggen at 2,469 meters, 8,100 feet. What makes Jotunheimen exceptional is the combination of massive peaks, deep valleys, and extensive glaciers, all shaped by repeated glaciations over millions of years. The region still contains more than 350 glaciers, each feeding rivers and lakes with cold, mineral-rich meltwater. One of the most striking features of Jotunheimen is its network of ancient trails. For thousands of years, people crossed these mountains to trade goods, herd animals, and travel between inland valleys. Even today, many of the same routes are used by hikers, making Jotunheimen one of Europe's most iconic trekking destinations. The climate here is harsher than in coastal regions. Temperatures can remain below freezing even in summer at high altitudes, and sudden storms are common. This environment supports hardy species like reindeer, wolverines, and golden eagles. And as the terrain gradually shifts from towering peaks to wider plateaus, the landscape transitions into another mountain region where Norway's highlands reveal a different, quieter kind of beauty. Rondane was Norway's first national park, established in 1962 to protect its fragile mountain ecosystem. The peaks here are lower than those in Jotunheimen, but they have a distinct character, rounded summits shaped by ancient glaciers that once covered the entire plateau. Several mountains exceed 2,000 meters, about 6,500 feet, forming a chain of gray, weathered peaks that dominate the horizon. The area is home to one of Europe's last wild reindeer herds. These animals migrate across the highlands, following routes they have used for thousands of years. The wide valleys and sparse vegetation make Rondane an ideal habitat for them, especially during the harsh winter months. Geologically, Rondane's rocks are among the oldest in Scandinavia, remnants of ancient seabeds that were pushed upward by tectonic forces long before the Ice Age. Over time, wind and ice smoothed the mountains, giving them the rounded appearance that defines the region today. And as you head farther north along the highlands, the landscape continues to evolve, becoming wilder, more open, and shaped by species uniquely adapted to life above the tree line. Dovrefjell is one of the few places in Europe where you can see wild musk oxen, animals that once roamed the Ice Age tundra alongside mammoths. These impressive creatures can weigh up to 400 kilograms, nearly 880 pounds, and they are perfectly adapted to the cold, with thick layers of wool that insulate them during harsh Arctic winters. Their presence gives Dovrefjell a rare glimpse into prehistoric wildlife. The park sits on a high plateau, with rolling mountains and wide valleys shaped by ancient glaciers. Elevations commonly reach 1,500 to 1,700 meters, about 4,900 to 5,600 feet. Because the soil here is thin and the climate is cold, vegetation is dominated by lichens, mosses, and hardy alpine plants. This makes the area ideal for species that thrive in open tundra landscapes, including Arctic foxes, wolverines, and reindeer. Historically, Dovrefjell served as a key travel corridor. For centuries, people crossed this plateau using the King's Road, an important route connecting northern and southern Norway. Today, modern highways follow similar paths, showing how geography still controls movement across the country. And as the mountains slowly give way to steeper terrain once again, the journey leads toward a region where cliffs and coastlines combine to form one of Norway's most dramatic hiking areas. Romsdalseggen is one of Norway's most dramatic ridge hikes, offering a view that combines sharp peaks, deep valleys, and glaciers in a single panorama. What makes this ridge so remarkable is the geological story behind it. The mountains here belong to the Romsdal Alps, a cluster of steep, jagged peaks formed when layers of hard metamorphic rock were uplifted and folded during ancient continental collisions. Later, powerful glaciers carved the deep U-shaped valleys that surround the ridge today. One of the most striking features visible from Romsdalseggen is Trolltunga, Europe's highest vertical rock face, rising 1,100 meters, around 3,600 feet straight up. This wall attracts experienced climbers from around the world, drawn by its extreme difficulty and sheer scale. The valley below, Romsdalen, is equally impressive. The Rama River flows through it, fed by snowmelt from the surrounding peaks. It has carved channels that reveal layers of ancient rock, creating a natural record of Norway's geological past. As you descend from the ridge, the scenery opens toward the coastline once again, leading to a completely different kind of Norwegian experience, where nature and engineering meet in a way few places can match. The Atlantic Ocean Road is one of Norway's most famous drives, an 8.3-kilometer stretch, roughly 5.1 miles, that hops across low islands and skerries linked by bridges. What makes this road remarkable isn't just the views, but the environment it was built in. This part of the Norwegian coast is exposed to some of the strongest storms in the North Atlantic. During construction in the 1980s, The site was hit by 12 major storms, each bringing huge waves that crashed over the emerging structure. The most iconic part of the route is the Storsøysundet Bridge, designed with a dramatic curve and elevation to withstand storm conditions. From certain angles, the bridge appears to leap into the air, a result of its unique geometry and the surrounding landscape. Beneath the surface, the ocean floor drops quickly, shaped by glacial movement and strong tidal currents. These waters are rich in marine life, attracting fishing communities for centuries. In fact, the area was once an important hub for transporting dried fish, which played a major role in Norway's coastal economy. And as the road turns inward from the ocean, the route begins to climb gradually into a valley shaped by ice, bringing you closer to one of Norway's most accessible glacier landscapes. Nigardsbreen is one of the most accessible glacier arms of the Jotunheimen ice cap, the largest glacier on mainland Europe. What makes Nigardsbreen so fascinating is how clearly it shows the movement of ice over time. The glacier flows from high on the plateau, slowly descending toward the valley at a rate that can reach several tens of meters, dozens of yards per year. As it moves, it cracks, folds, and shifts, revealing deep blue ice formed under enormous pressure. Historical records show that Nigardsbreen advanced dramatically during the Little Ice Age in the 1700s, destroying farms that once stood in the valley. Since then, the glacier has retreated significantly, leaving behind a landscape of polished rock, moraines, and meltwater lakes. These features make it an ideal example of how glaciers reshape their surroundings. Visitors can walk close to the glacier's front, where the ice transitions into turquoise meltwater. The valley around Nigardsbreen is carved into smooth curves by centuries of ice movement, creating a clear view of how far the glacier once extended. And with this final stop, the journey through Norway's landscapes comes full circle, from jagged peaks and deep fjords to glaciers that continue to shape the country today. Norway is a land of contrasts: ancient rock, young landscapes, calm coastlines, and steep Arctic cliffs. Every place we've visited is shaped by forces that are still at work today, constantly reshaping the country's mountains, valleys, and glaciers. Seeing these landscapes with that context makes each view feel deeper and more alive. And even though this journey ends here, the story doesn't. There are many regions around the world shaped by the same powerful processes, and others that couldn't be more different. So if you'd like to keep exploring the most fascinating landscapes on Earth, there's much more ahead. The next adventures are already waiting.